Thank you all very much. I think there may end up being a few questions about some of the cases. Each of you said this case is very well known. You've probably talked about it, but it would be interesting to know some of, particularly Brazilian Oxitec studies, some of the work in malaria in both in across African countries, the food crops in African countries, and certainly the malaria in Thailand and Southeast Asia. It would be interesting to hear your particular perspectives as opposed to the perspectives that we get reading tertiary literature in this country. So if we could start out with that for just a moment, and then I'll take questions from the group. So if there were things that you would have said, if you'd had a half an hour instead of 20 minutes, about the particular big name cases, so Oxitec mosquitoes in Brazil and other Latin American countries, the malarial studies and control that you were talking about that we probably knew about, what do you think we know and what would you want us to know, and also about food crops in particular in Africa? Things that you think are controversial that we may not know the controversy the way you do.
Yeah. Well, as far as we actually looking at how we can convince the policymakers on the new technologies with the work on transgenic mosquitoes. Because we decided to use the same method with the insect-resistant cotton, which does not go necessarily into the human food chain. And that gave us a leverage to sell the SEC technology. And so when they hear about transgenic mosquitoes, they, oh, you mean you can use the same technology for malaria? They get interested and they listen, because all they want is how to win the next election.
Yes, either one.
It's on.
It's on. In our country, we still do not have, I think, very few experience about a transgenic mosquito or gene dive. I'm not sure. I just only heard about the Wolbachia in Aedes mosquito, and that would be nice to hear, because the Wolbachia is, from many papers, it doesn't harm the environment, and it doesn't harm the people as well. But for the malaria control in our country, for my experience for many years, I thought about the gene dive or the modified mosquito. We more or less so-called not really attractive for me, because we have a very good collaborator and network among the Greater Mekong region country, and every country have the purpose, have the aims to eliminate the malaria. Like in Thailand, we will eliminate it in 2024, and some country like Cambodia will eliminate in 2025, 2030. And eliminate, it doesn't mean no malaria. We can have malaria, but malaria can be introduced one case, and we have to stop no more second case, something like that. This is called eliminate. And as well, because our country is not the island, we have some border with at least 4 countries. So, and the 4 countries, especially the end of this year, we will operate the AEC, so Asian Economic Community. So every country can go within the country forward and back, and also the labor can also go across the country. So we just, but anyway, we have the meeting several times with the neighbor country how to control the disease. And But for ED, for dengue fever, we are very worried because it's never go down, and some year is even very increased. So that is my point.
Thank you.
I was not involved or close,
close,
to Brazil, Panama, Cayman Islands, but I think that the scientific part, the design of the trial, the rearing, production of mosquitoes were really good. They joined a Brazilian university, and even though results published are encouraging, finding out 90% of reduction of population of Aedes aegypti in one barrio. How do you say barrio? Small
Neighborhood.
Neighborhood in Brazil. There were so many secretive things that were not published that contributed to make, how do you say, like un ambiente, it's not like an environment of doubt, of fear, and of not trusting what was going on and having, I don't know, unfunded things like, or funded or not unfunded. And one of the things that was not clearly transmitted to the population was what endpoint they were measuring. It was only reduction in mosquito densities. But at the same time they were doing the trial, there was a dengue outbreak. So the population was complaining, why we're doing this? Because it did not reduce cases. So I think it's very important to be clear, to explain or to make what was going to measure and what is the extent of what I am testing, so the population will not think it will be something that will cure the disease now. We have to be clear that this is not going to happen in 2 years or 3 years. A reduction in populations and reduction in disease is something that will take longer, I think more than 1 season, at least. And there's something that, and that's what I wanted to present, the governance of the trials, is because when the company, there was a conflict of interest, when the company that is promoting the use of the genetic modified mosquitoes is also involved in the regulations, in the commercial part, in the trials, in the everything, it's seen as a conflict of interest. I'm not saying that it was an interest there, but it is seen as a conflict of interest by many people, and it's just a scale up. So having that external observer group, for me, it's something that will allow a transparency of the trial, and people probably will trust what is going on, and results published are what's been found, when nothing has been hidden.
Thank you all very much. So questions from the committee? So starting with Anne.
Thank you very much for very nice presentations. I have a question for, I think for the three of you. There's so much happening in the South. Listening to Diran, listening to what's happening in Thailand, what's happening in Guatemala. There's actually so much that is happening around this area of genetic engineering and new innovations, which perhaps would be useful for the poor. My question is, how can we enhance, South-South learning? The much that you've been able to learn, within, how can we enhance learning towards, ensuring that this can inform feasible, pro-poor governance systems in the South? The other question goes to Diran. There's so much which has been happening around development of regulatory systems for management of biotech, and mainly agrobiotechnology. And listening to you, you've said that there are some political, issues around how development of regulatory systems has evolved in Africa. These lessons that we can draw from, biotech, in particular agrobiotechnology, how can these inform, a development of structures or systems for governing gene drives applications in Africa? I know you've talked about the role of the civil society in kind of contributing to the stalemate that has kind of, slowed down, coming up with regulatory structures, especially in Kenya, you mentioned. Do you think this has to do with, kind of, a poor or weak community engagement, what we can call inclusive community engagement, governance systems? They are lacking in some of those countries. Do you think that has to do with that? Because that is an indicator of poor governance systems. Do you think failure to come up with systems which are inclusive that perhaps would open up, opportunities for some of these institutions or agencies or perspectives like the civil society, how they can be engaged or involved in regulatory, systems? Do you think that can help, coming up with structures that are inclusive? And finally, do you think African Union, because African Union perhaps is targeting policy actors much more than, the communities. Do you think there's something that African Union or other regional economic communities could do to come up with the structures that would kind of be bottom up, kind of, where the communities, you'd come up with structures for awareness creation to the public, the communities, capacity building for the, for the communities? Do you think there's something that they can do going beyond now just targeting the policymakers? Because you seem to be engaging the policymakers much more than the communities who are actually supposed to be the beneficiaries of some of these technologies. Thank you.
So, Dr. Makinde, if you could start with the questions that were directed to you, specifically about community engagement, civil society engagement, and then policymaker engagement in Africa. And then we can perhaps move to the questions about, and I want to point out the use of South-South referring to developing lower and middle income countries and partnerships among them, although Thailand is technically north, above the equator. So north of the equator. So South-South in the sense of strengthening the ways in which we think about policy and collaboration among countries in more similar positions. So starting with the immediate question.
Thank you, Liz. Yeah, Anne, I agree with you about the non-inclusivity of the stakeholders when it comes to regulatory frameworks. Let me just give you a brief history. The African Union Commission Human Resources, Science and Technology came up with the African Model Law on Biosafety, which was a consultancy project given to a European country, in which it was to us deliberate to put in some clauses that will be kind of impediment to the adoption of the technology. For instance, this precautionary principles was grossly, knowingly, intentionally misinterpreted to now emphasize the issue of strict liability. They also misinterpreted that when we're talking about crop or plant or agricultural biotechnology. There's no need to include pharmaceuticals. So when they combine this, and some African Union member states, with the poor understanding of biosafety systems, just bought the whole thing, hook, line, and sinker from that model law. And like I said, we are importers of this technology. So the developers then have to say, look, guys, we cannot come into your country. There's no enabling legal environment for us to operate. And that was what caused it. If you refer to my slides, I showed you about 11 countries in Africa with biosafety laws, but no trials going on there. So we have had to now do revised law to make this biosafety law workable. On the bottom-up approach you said we used, yes. We find that when you go, we use top-down. If you go bottom-up, they get stuck at the director level in the various ministries. So the director will just say, this is not, I'm going to push this. So there is that element of stagnation in the process at that level. And what do you do next? You go to somebody above that director to say, this is exactly what we're going through. This is what we know is going to be useful for your country. The minister or the permanent secretary may buy the story, but it depends on how you package the story and how you deliver it. That's why I said that I found myself, and I led the university system into what is called science diplomacy, because you have to really know how to package your story for them to understand you. The only stakeholder we have realized we left out in Africa are the farmers' organizations. We've seen how the farmers' organizations have operated in Asia and Latin America. They adopted the technology legally, and the government had to come around to quickly accept. But we don't want to go that route. I tell people, we want to carry everybody along so that there be no fault being partitioned to anybody. But I agree with you that we have also lagged behind in the area of biosafety communications. We do not communicate. We ask the regulators to be our spokespersons, but they don't have that ability. Even the scientists that are working on transgenics are a little bit shy. They don't have the confidence to come out publicly to say, this is what we have found, this is what we have done with the risk assessments. So it's, but like I always tell people, Africa is moving. We are really getting along. All the countries that had these unworkable laws, they have come back to us to say, please, come and help us. We want our farmers to be like the Burkinabes farmers. Thank you. But on the pro-poor issue, I think, yes, I agree with you, we have to start working together, and we've been doing that. Every year, we take regulators, policymakers to India, to Brazil, for best practices. It's very important, because we believe in the concept that seeing is believing. And that is what has been helping the countries to move forward. Thank you.
Other comments about collaboration among countries that are not necessarily South, but are in the global South as development folks talk about it?
No, that is obvious.
It's obvious that it's important.
We're working together with Imperial College, Michigan State University. You know, that is taken, because that is where we can actually get the best ideas on how to train our people, either for academic purposes or in the practice of a regulatory system.
Dr. Swankard, does Thailand cooperate or work with other countries? Do you have recommendations about that for other countries in lower and middle income regions.
As I mentioned, we have the 6-country Greater Mekong region that we work together closely about the malaria control and malaria elimination. And this is the network have meetings several times a year, or at least one time. And also, in among some countries like Thailand and Myanmar, we have Twin City Border Committee, and we meet every year. And every year this is just an example, every year we do agree for some disease control, like rabies control between the 2 countries. So it's first of all, we have to how to convince the country or the neighbor or the other country to see the problems that what we've seen. So to see the same problems, and then they will agree with us to collaborate or to be the network for the control in the long run.
And Dr. Padilla, you pointed out that Guatemala is also north of the equator, but in terms of other cooperation and collaboration in regulation and in oversight research as well.
I'm not aware of collaborations south to south going on regulations and oversight, except this group, Mosquito Guide, MosGuide, which I'm not sure if continue. It was on Mexico, Panama, Brazil, India, and some other countries. But I think that what added value of the south-to-south collaboration is that you can share experiences of how to translate knowledge to policy and how to implement activities in the low to middle income country, which has the different challenges that can be shared, and that's always important. So I think it's really a good point, and it's a forum for everybody to share not only the experiences but also the questions and the fears what you will have or what you have to respond in your own country as a public officer.
Thank you. Jason, or are you David?
I'm asking a question on behalf of David Winnikoff, one of our colleagues who's not in the auditorium today. He's asking if the potential irreversibility of gene drives and their intrinsic logic of spread distinguish them from other environmental applications of biotechnology that you've discussed, and if so, are those aspects relevant for how decisions are made or should be made about experiments or release in your country's contexts?
On plant or animals?
To clarify, I think David is pointing out that most of you have talked about traditional genetically modified crops and other technologies with some reference to insects, although I don't think that any of you addressed gene drives in particular. Gene drives are made to spread throughout an environment, and we've heard some evidence from scientists that there's not a way to completely reverse a gene drive once it's been released into the environment. So do those characteristics of a gene drive create a different kind of decision-making logic in terms of trials or experiments in your country's contexts? And I think I think David would like to ask for all of you that question.
I deliberately did not go into that area because if you look at status, only 2 or 3 countries in Africa can be described as actually being in the full picture of gene drives. South Africa, Burkina Faso, and Sudan. And one of the things we had to take up about 3 years ago was the development of resistance to BT genes, which of course the developers quickly worked on. And things are improving. But there are those pockets of resistance developed in South Africa. Another thing that was discovered and of a big, huge impact that the activists are holding on to is the fiber length of the lint in BT cotton. The developers are not able to backcross quickly into the conventional variety that I gave about 28 millimeter fiber length. And then with the BT cotton, they're getting at 26.5 millimeters, which does not attract any premium at the global market. So this is one of, you have these sort of challenges coming up in the gene drive, and I know everybody is working on it. We are not supposed to, as a regulatory agency, we are not supposed to promote the technology directly, but there's a very thin line between the regulatory system and the technology itself, because why are you regulating if you know you won't get the benefits? So we strive on our own to maintain our own credibility through fact-based neutrality. That is what we use, and that's what I tell my colleagues. But I quite agree with you that those countries, Sudan hasn't come with any pocket of maybe environmental risks yet, but I can see them coming up with some, because they have this amalgamation of events in the country, which we have pointed out to them. They have the Chinese, they have the Indian. So I don't know, but this is I don't know whether.
I think that, yes, it is perceived in a different way. We have a lot of misinformation or no information of what are the consequences or the risk, whatever definition you would like, of releasing them. It's been transmitted as something that it's released, it will spread, and it never come back. Even if you can switch it off in some way, it's not perfect. The Starlink technique is something more easy to understand, easy to associate with other ongoing initiatives like Moscamed and all the fruit flies that we're very used to, and population too. So I think it will be challenging a little bit more, and we need to generate more proof of no risk or
to the Southeast Asia country, as I have some study in Cambodia, and we found that it's not easy to do something that like a modification, because even the entomologists in the country, they're really low. So for my project in Cambodia, we have to build, or we have to make construct or make the idol entomologist, something like that. So to do this kind of thing in some country, in especially Southeast Asia country, is so-called difficult. But for the transgenic, for the plant or something else, I'm also think it's still far away from this country. So if we would like to do this, it's the challenge, even in Thailand. We do have many entomologists, but as I said, we still don't have any big study about this.
Others? Anne? Yes.
It's just a point. I know, Tiran, when you were making your presentation, you said that you're very happy that this committee has considered, including the voices of the low-income countries. And I think that was an excellent, introduction. My question is, what would you want to see this committee include in the report? Something which perhaps would open up, the discussions about gene drives, debate in Africa. Something in particular and specific that you'd want to see the committee consider in this report. I know you've spoken about capacity issues. You've spoken about, challenges, which to me have to do with politics of, these new technologies and how they are evolving and being introduced in, particularly in Africa. And you've spoken about issues to do with, basically capacity and resources. But is there something, which, from your own perspective and also having, interacted with many, African governments, many experts, in these, new technological areas, is there something that you'd want to see? I know you've spoken about, Burkina Faso and Sudan as being the pioneer countries, in the area of gene drives technology. Perhaps it would be good for you to tell us, did these countries, develop new regulatory instruments for these particular, applications, or are they using the same, regulatory structures they are using for the agro, biotechnologies?
Thank you. Actually, you've hit the point on the head. I was wondering when I was coming here, because I told, we worked together with African Academy of Sciences to Dr. Abegas, based in Nairobi. And when we're talking about STI in Africa, it's still not, especially innovation part of it, it's still not fully understood. It sometimes think innovation is still the same thing as R&D. But what I expect the National Academy of Sciences here in the US to do for us will be two. We need partnerships, which you can recommend, which will be impactful, not just the kind they referred to earlier as maybe of tourism. No. Meaningful partnerships. And I don't want us to think we've got enough capacity. People do argue that, oh yes, you've trained so many masters and PhD in Africa, but they are not empowered to deliver. So like my colleague from Guatemala was saying, the issue of infrastructure, they get it, they come back to Africa, but that's the end of it. And before you know it, they've been promoted to become director and then start doing management work. So I want NAS to see how, if they're going to work through NEPAD or even on bilateral basis, not multilateral, select a couple of countries that you say, okay, now let's work with this, but not Kenya. Kenya has disappointed a lot of people. Sorry, Anne. They put this moratorium since 2012. They banned the importation. We've done everything possible. We went to Nairobi in August, and the deputy president said the ban will be lifted in 2 months. And what do you have the following week? It was taken to court, just like they did in Ghana. We cannot, you see, the activism you have in the developing world is like, I don't want to use the negative word, but they are not constraining the status of the poor people and the farmers. We know the people behind them, because when you see those who take governments to court in some of the African Union member states, you know they cannot afford it. The resources came from outside Africa or from outside their countries to do the litigation. And they have the resources to get the best team of lawyers to deal with the government. Ghana one, we're hoping that we're going to see the light, we're going to get out of it very soon, but Kenya is still unsolvable.
think it may be time for coffee and a bit of a break. And thank you all for your very interesting, both very valuable slides with much information, and your comments now. Thank you.
Thank you.